religion around the world, what makes us think that the Christians' claims or our worldviews are actually the true worldviews compared to other worldviews. So we're going to be looking at different worldviews, and then some of the errors contained in these worldviews. Remember last time we talked about presuppositions, but what we focused on the last lecture was presupposition of dominant Christian groups. Now we are taking it out of the Christian group this time to a more secular and philosophical worldviews. So that's our concern. So our talk outline is as follows. We're going to be looking at the following worldviews: atheism, agnosticism, skepticism, infidelity, deism, pantheism, and panentheism, basically. So, and later we're going to be looking at the reasons for unbeliefs or causes of unbeliefs regarding these worldviews and why Christianity is true. Now, to start with, it is good for us to understand what each of these worldviews, what they represent, what they stand for, so that when we engage them in the discussion or in a talk about Christianity, we know where our opponents are coming from, so we know where to actually approach them and what kind of response we should give to them. So the first we are considering this afternoon is atheism. Well, we are going to consider the atheistic worldview this afternoon. So to start with, what is atheism? Now, this is a combination of two words. We have a prefix, where we separate that from the main stock of the word. Theism is talking about God. So the A before the theism, which is the prefix, is actually the negation this time. So atheism is open and positive denial of the existence of God. Coincidentally, today is April 1st, and Psalm 14 verse 1 says, the fool statement is that there is no God. So, make a fool of themselves. Perhaps we should rub this day off and we call it March 32nd, so that we don't give any day again. So that, by the way, so atheism is open and positive denial of the existence of God. The word atheism comes from the word that is in Greek, and theos. So the word theos is talking about God. So the prefix that we have before theos is actually the negation, which means without or no God. So atheism basically means that there is no God. That is that worldview. That's what it stands for. That's the tenets of that worldview, that there is no God. But how true is this worldview? Now, before we continue, it's easier to be or to claim to be an atheist than to defend being an atheist. Many people say we are atheists, we don't believe there is God, but defending it becomes very tedious. So I'm going to be looking into that. So atheism does not refer to a mere ignorance of God. In this case, they're not just ignorant of the existence of God, but implies to one who considers himself informed on the claims and evidence for the existence of God, who emphatically denies them. So an atheist said there is no God anywhere. God doesn't exist. So take God out of the picture. I'm not accountable to anybody. And since there is no God, there is no moral law or standard or a judge that judges whatever I do. I am the Lord over myself. I decide what I want. I determine my own fate. There is no God, no judgment in view, and so on and so forth. So we're going to be seeing some of the errors contained in this worldview. Like I said, atheism involves the rejection of any form of theism. What theism is talking about, God or Godism, like some people will say it. So a thought, a discourse about God, the concept of God. So atheism outrightly rejects any form of theism. So to be an atheist is to disavow belief in any form of God or gods. So that's according to R.C. Sproul. So how true is that claim? That is our concern. How true is this claim for anybody to rise up and say, yes, well, there is no God, there is no God anywhere at all, So there is no supreme being, no God is responsible for the creation of the world and things like that. Creation just happened, maybe by Big Bang theory or some evolution theory, random chances and things like that. So how good, how verifiable, how true are these claims? So let's go further to understanding what atheism is all about and what they stand for. Bruce Lockerbie, in his book, In Dismissing God, referred to atheism as the abdication of belief and described the person who falls into this category in this way. He said, for the ardent disbeliever, the hypothesis and its given preposition or propositions are one and the same. Its proposition is simply God does not exist. So that is what an atheist stands for. All that has energized the human imagination and motivation, or motivated the human spirit with prospects, of nirvana. Nirvana is actually found, among the Hindus, so and in this field of Elysians, he said the happy hunting grounds, the paradise or heaven, all of these motivations, this imagination that we have about heaven, about this paradise, all that is meant when the book of Ecclesiastes declared that God has set eternity in the hearts of men, must be validated and counterclaims of atheism. So in other words, atheism actually rejects any thought of heaven, any thought of God, any thought of a judge, a supreme being, any thought of we being accountable to a supreme being or to a superior power at all. So atheism says there is nothing like a God, there is no God anywhere, therefore I become the God over myself. Now, how easy is it for an atheist to live in the world where there is no God? So we're going to talk, in a jiffy on the futility or the absurdity of life without God. If there is no God, therefore the world runs into anarchy. Anything goes. I can see a person tomorrow and I don't like his face and I put a gun, put the trigger and I shoot them because there is no judgment anywhere. Nobody charges me for that. And so anything goes. Evil can be perpetrated on that because nobody, there is no check, no judge of our motives, of our morality and whatever we do. So we are not accountable to anybody. There is no sense of eternal judgment or retribution or reward whatsoever, in the world where there is no God. So in that kind of world where there is no God, I doubt even if an atheist can exist and can even survive in such a world. Because in such a world, what gives us a restraint to some of our excesses and the evil that could have been perpetrated and that could have saturated the whole world is because there is the sense of judgment somewhere on the inside of us. So, but if we live in the world where there is no God, evil become prevalent, people begin to perpetrate evil and do all manner of inhuman activities, immoral activities, because there is no restraint, there is no check whatsoever. And I doubt if an atheist can even survive in that kind of a world. So from the onset, we are seeing some of the flaws and the pitfalls that are leading in the atheistic worldview. But let's continue. So there are three types of atheists, practically speaking. We have the absolute atheist. Absolute atheist is the one who denies the absolute existence of God. Here is the person who argues and says, I have examined all the facts as the existence of God, and I deny them as proving his existence. So the absolute atheist said, I have examined all the facts, and I can conclude that there is no God anywhere, since there are no proofs of his existence. So there is no God anywhere. This kind of word got into prominence after the World War II, when, during the Holocaust of the Jews, and millions of Jews were killed. Adolf Hitler killed a lot of them in the gas chambers, and a lot of evil happened and things like that. And the question came to the mind of many people, if God actually exists, and if there is God at all, God should be good. And if God is good, that means it does not will evil. Then if God exists, that means a God that must be a God, must be all wise, So if he is wise, then he will not create a world that will be a bunch of abnormalities that we are saying. Then if God is God, then he must be all-powerful. And therefore, if he's all-powerful, how come he created the world that he doesn't have control over? These were the questions that were raised, because of the presence and the existence of evil and suffering on earth. And some people said, majorly the atheists, they said, now the existence of evil and suffering actually is, they contradicts, the existence of God. So the existence of evil disproves the existence of a good, of a wise, and a powerful God. So they said, on the ground of this alone, and some other things, we cannot lay hold on any evidence, but it's like the atheist, it's like the same reason why a armed robber, a criminal will not see a police. That's the same reason why an atheist will not see God in creation. An armed robber is always afraid and doesn't want the police to see him. So even when the policeman passes by his side, he pretends not to see. But that's the same reason why an atheist will pretend not to see, the handiwork of God in creation, because he doesn't want to be under the judgment of anybody whatsoever. So that is absolute atheist. Then let's see another type of atheist that we have. We have the providential atheist. This is the person who simply doubts the existence of God, but firmly denies his providential dealings and the care of God for the things of this world. However, this person in effect denies the being of God, for it strips him of his omnipotence, wisdom, mercy, justice, and righteousness. Why? Why would an atheist think this way? Because of their desire to be uncontrolled in their lost pattern. So they don't want to be under the control of anybody, under the control of a supreme being, so to speak. So they deny and they strip God of his omnipotence, of his wisdom, of his mercy, of his justice and righteousness. So this kind of atheist is sometimes called a deist. Now, a deist, we are going to get into that in our subsequent discussion. Now, a deist is the one who believes that God actually exists and he created the universe, but after creating the universe, he stayed up in heaven and he allowed the universe to run itself by natural laws. So he stood aloof, and old Papa who just like winding his clock and allow it to work for itself. So he said, God has nothing to do with the universe, has nothing to do with man. He has nothing to do with this world whatsoever. So he stayed in heaven, though he created it, but he stayed in heaven. He has nothing whatsoever to do with us here. So, providential atheist falls into this category. In every atheist, there is a moral twist. That's what we see in every atheist. He denies God because he wants freedom from any responsibility for his sin. And we live in the world where people are actually clamoring for autonomous self. I just want to be myself. That's a side of humanism that wants to be itself, that wants to be the Lord over himself, doesn't want to be under the control of anybody. So the doctrine of autonomous self gives man, the right to be his own God, to live a life without a check from a superior being or a supreme being whatsoever. So, and it is denied God because he wants freedom. However, God actually gives freedom, but the freedom he gives is not the freedom to do what we want to do, but what we ought to do. So the atheist is not ready to do what he ought to do because he's not ready to submit himself to the authority of God or the moral judgment of God. Therefore, it denies God altogether. So it's like the person who does not want to come to the light because his deeds are evil, according to John chapter 3, 19 to 20. So that is a providential atheist. Then we have practical atheists. By this, we refer to a secret or partial atheism, which is present in the majority of the world. These do not actually deny the being of God, but by their action and lifestyles, by their evil and neglect of God, or by their denial of certain aspects and rights of his divine and sovereign being over them, they deny him and act as though there were no God. Titus chapter 1 verse 16 says, they profess to know God, but by their deeds they deny him, being detestable and disobedient and worthless for any good deed. Now, practical atheists sometimes they shock us that we can even find that among Christians, sometimes some believers, maybe you should use the word, Christians loosely now, those who just claim affiliation to the church or Christianity, who don't really have a genuine relationship with Jesus Christ. Some of them, they live their life as though there is no God. Isaiah raised a concern in chapter 40 of Isaiah. He said, God was talking, he said, I am God and there is no one like me. There's no God with me. No one to be compared with me. So why was God saying that? Why would God have to remind us of that again? It's because some people are living as though there is no God. They live their life without any measure of restraint. They live their life as if there is no God at all. So Isaiah raised the call. He said, and God was talking to him, he said, I am God. You must still remember that. You must understand that. You must give me that honor. I am God. But atheists or practical atheists denies God with the way they live their lives, neglecting God altogether. So that is, these are the three types of atheists that we have now we can find ourselves interacting with as we engage in gospel message. However, like I said, let us see some of the pitfalls in atheistic worldview. Some of their pitfalls includes the following. Declaring oneself to be an atheist, however, is much easier, like I said before, than defending the concept of atheism. Somebody can say, I'm an atheist, I don't believe God exists, but how well can you defend this? How well? Some said, oh, we can't ascribe creation to any God. The creation happened. Some people claim evolution as the reason for creation, that's just happened by random chance, happened by Big Bang theory, a molecular splash somewhere. The question is, they said there was a spark somewhere that caused whatever we see now. And the question is, who sparked the spark?
The spark,
yes, we must start from that question. Who actually sparked the spark? If there is no God, then who sparked the spark? Now, for anybody to have claimed to be an atheist, it presupposes that such a person must have been well acquainted with everything on earth for him to make such a claim that there is no God at all anywhere. He must have been an omnipresent person himself, an omniscient person, to be all-knowing and is everywhere for him to make such a claim that there is no God at all. And so if we have such a person like that, who said, I have gone around, I'm acquainted with everything in nature, and there is no God, then we can gladly say we have one already. We have one God already, because it's only God that claims omniscience and omnipresence. So for you to say you have known everything and you can make a claim, a conclusion that there is no God, that means you are a God standing by yourself. So such a claim, it's not tenable. But let's see some of the pitfalls. Like I said, we said declaring oneself to be an atheist, however, is much easier than defending the concept of atheism. Think of it this way. In order to defend atheism, a person would have to know every single fact there is to know. Because the one fact that avoided detection.
I can't hear you anymore, sir.
Oh.
Okay.
Are you still hear me now? Can you hear me now?
Oh, better now.
Okay. So like we said, the pitfall in this atheistic worldview says for anybody to actually come to this conclusion, so we should look at it this way. In order to defend atheism, a person would have to know every single fact that there is to know, because the one fact that avoided detection might just be the fact of the existence of God. Let's say, according to Theodore Quislive, let's see what he said concerning atheism. He said that the denial of the existence of God involves a perfectly monstrous hypothesis.
Sorry, your slide is off now.
It's off. Okay. Let me share my screen again so that. Sorry about that.
No problem.
Okay, I think you should have it now.
Yeah, it's back.
Okay, thank you. So, according to Theodore, he said, the denial of the existence of God involves a perfectly monstrous hypothesis. That is, when looked at more closely, an unconscionable assumption. Before one can say that the world is without a God, it must first have become thoroughly conversant with the whole world. In short, to be able to affirm authoritatively that there is no God or God does not exist, a man must be omniscient and omnipresent, that is, himself must be God. And then, after all, there will be one. So we can say the pitfall in that, for you to have said there is no God, you must have been well conversant with the whole world. And for you to say that, then you must be omniscient and omnipresent for you to make such a claim. So we see one of the pitfalls in that atheistic worldview. So, which is actually the major pitfall. So we said, with this worldview, the atheistic worldview cannot be true. It is wrong. It doesn't actually represent the true worldview of the scripture. It runs contrary to what the Christian worldview believes about God. And it is unacceptable because the Bible establishes that God is actually, that God exists, that God created the universe. We can ascribe the creation of the universe and attribute that to God. According to Psalm 19, the heavens declare the glory of God, the firmament show forth his handiwork. Day unto day they shred knowledge, so we see the creation of God we see the hand of God in creation rather. So creation itself is a testimony that God exists. So having said that, we have a twin brother to atheism, and that is agnosticism. It's a twin brother in the sense that, it moves a bit away from atheism that denies that there is no God absolutely. No, but agnosticism in this case says we cannot be so sure if God exists or not. So it's a twin brother to atheism actually. Let's see some of the tenets of agnosticism, but let's start with what it actually means. Perhaps the logical contradiction inherent in atheism, one would have to be God in order to know God does not exist, has caused many unbelievers to affirm agnosticism instead. So because of that pitfall that we pointed out in our previous slide, some people could not actually, they can actually support their claims and their conclusions on atheism that there is no God, since they have to be God themselves for them to make such a claim and such a conclusion. And because for them to take that stand, that means they must, they must have been God themselves. So some of them, they shifted into agnosticism. So what does that mean? The agnostic, which means of without knowledge. The word gnosis means knowledge. The word app that is the prefix before gnosis that we have here is without. So agnostic is the person who says it is impossible to know if God exists due to the fact that there simply is not enough credible evidence to warrant such a conclusion. So agnostic said they can't know for sure. It is impossible for a finite to know the infinite. It's impossible for a mortal or anybody to actually know if God exists or not, because we do not have enough credible evidence to warrant the conclusion that God exists. So according to R.C. Sproul, he believes that the agnostic seeks to declare neutrality on this issue. And there's no form of neutrality. It's either you believe or you don't believe. So, but they seek to declare neutrality on the issue of the existence of God, desiring to make neither assertion nor denial of the theistic question. The agnostic maintains that there is insufficient knowledge upon which to make an intellectual judgment about theism. So since there is no sufficient knowledge upon which we can make intellectual judgment that God exists or not, therefore, we can actually say it is not possible for anybody to conclude that God exists or not. Now, looking deeply into agnosticism, it's in a way a form of denial of God too, though they do not come out outrightly to deny the existence of God, but they said it's impossible, to actually know if God exists or not, since we don't have enough evidence to support, or that warrants such a conclusion. So that's agnosticism. Let's go for that. This word comes from agnosis, which means not knowing. The school of thought does not deny the existence of God, only that there are no sufficient grounds, rational proofs or empirical proofs, that God exists. Some people, the reason they deny the existence of God, they are looking for rational or empirical proofs for the existence of God. So agnostic said, since we don't have any sufficient grounds, whether rational or empirical, that God exists, or that if God does exist, it can be known. In reality, it is an unwillingness to accept any of the sources of the knowledge of God. Now, like Ecclesiastes said, it said that God has placed eternity in the heart of every man. That means intrinsically, there is something in every man that yearns for God. There is an innate consciousness for God in every man, but the agnostic denies this innate consciousness altogether. So there are different sources for our knowledge of God, which includes the innate source, includes tradition, nature itself. As a matter of fact, the very first book God wrote to humanity was nature. So in nature, we have the general revelation of God. God revealed himself through nature to humanity, looking at the intricacies of nature, the flowers, the forest, the oceans, the sea, the star, the constellation of stars, the Milky Way, everything. They all attest to the existence of a wise and powerful God. According to some of the arguments for the existence of God, we have the cosmological argument that something cannot exist without a cause. The argument for cause and effect, because God is not caused and it's not an effect, it's an uncaused cause. So the word is an effect, and if there is an effect, there must be a cause. So, but God is an uncaused cause that caused everything to be. So we go further to the theological argument for God's existence, which says, now, if my clothes, this is somebody designed this. So if there is a design, that means there is a designer somewhere. So we see design and order in creation. We see the sun will come in the daytime, the moon comes at night. We have not seen any alteration of this order. We see the stars shining forth at night. We see rain coming in its own season and things like that. The ocean doesn't cross its own boundary, and we see everything, nature and everything working concertedly in an orderly manner. It shows that somebody could have been responsible for this. So if there is order, if there is a design, there is a designer responsible for it. So, but an agnostic had decided to shut his eyes and close his eyes from all these evidences and sources of knowledge that are so plethora, that are everywhere, that you can see everywhere. The earth is filled with the knowledge of God. The handwriting, the earth is full of the handwriting of God. The word is a testimony for the existence of God. So we could see the knowledge of God we derive that from our innate consciousness, from tradition, from nature, and from revelation. God has revealed himself through nature, first of all, or primarily. And again, God reveals himself specially through the scripture, and ultimately through his son, Jesus Christ. So, but, an agnostic is unwilling to accept this, an unwillingness to accept, this source of knowledge of God. Instead, the agnostic says, I cannot know if God exists or not. That's agnosticism. So let's go for that. We have the third one, which is another word we are considering, is skepticism. Now, skepticism is simply put, a doubt about the existence of God. That's used philosophically now, but a skeptic is the person who doubts anything. So the skeptic is the person who doubts there is a God. The Standard Dictionary defines, or definition is quite revealing when it describes a skeptic as one who holds to the doctrine that true knowledge or knowledge in a particular area is uncertain, and who has doubts concerning basic religious principles. Notice that a skeptic does not claim knowledge of God or God's existence is unattainable. In other words, like the agnostics say that the knowledge of God's existence is unattainable, the skeptics does not claim that the knowledge of God is unattainable, but only uncertain. So the skeptic said the knowledge of God is uncertain. The agnostic said the knowledge of God is unattainable. So you can see the difference between the two. Again, the agnostic said the knowledge of God is uncertain, or unattainable rather. The skeptic said the knowledge of God is uncertain. However, the skeptic does not stop at mere uncertainty. In fact, skepticism confidently challenges not merely religious and metaphysical knowledge, but all knowledge claims that venture beyond immediate experience. So the key word here is immediate experience. So whatever is beyond my immediate experience, I reject. That is skepticism. So the skeptic doesn't accept anything that is beyond his immediate experience. So he said, I don't want to go beyond that. I only judge the word and everything, based on my immediate experience. Translated into common parlance, this simply means that a skeptic is not prepared to accept anything that cannot be verified empirically. And we know there are many things that cannot be verified empirically. I love you. When I use the word, how can I verify the word I love you? My feelings empirically. I can't go to the laboratory, to test how the level of my love or whatever. So there are certain things that go beyond empirical scrutiny. But, the skeptic said, if we cannot verify this empirically, therefore we reject it altogether. So that is where the skeptics stand. Thus, in the end, the skeptic does not say he cannot know that God exists. Rather, he says he doubts that God exists because it cannot be seen, felt, measured, weighed, or probed by the scientific method. And truly, God cannot be weighed scientifically. But we know that science itself had given us a testimony for the existence of God, because science starts its investigation from the things God created himself. Scientific endeavor, they are not done in abstract. They are done on the ground of what already exists. So the question is, if these things exist, then who is responsible for their existence? So we see the flaws in the skeptic's worldview. Skepticism is unacceptable. It runs contrary to the Christian's view about God. Therefore, we reject that altogether. Now, let's see one other worldview that is closer to skepticism, that is infidelity. Now, the infidel is the person who does not only refuse to believe in God himself, but also is intolerant of or actively opposed to those who do. So an infidel is intolerant, and he actively opposes those who believe in the existence of God. He opposes them. So a study of human history provides a veritable plethora of men and women who made quite a name for themselves via their public display of infidelity. We see a French atheist, an existential philosopher, Jean Paul. So he said this, he opined, he said, everything is indeed permitted if God does not exist. And man is in consequence fallen, for he cannot find anything to depend upon, either within or outside himself. Nor on the other hand, if God does not exist, are we provided with any values or commanded that could legitimize our behavior? Again, I read that again, I'm going to explain. According to the French atheist and existential philosopher, he said, that's Jean Paul, said, everything is indeed permitted if God does not exist. I've established that before. And man is in consequence fallen, for he cannot find anything to depend upon, either within or outside himself. If God does not exist, so there's nothing I want to depend on, whether within or outside myself. So that's what he's trying to explain here. Nor on the other hand, if God does not exist, are we provided with any value or command that will legitimize our behavior? So if God does not exist, we are not provided with any value, no value system. Value systems are eroded, no moral standard to follow, no commands, nothing that will legitimize our behavior. So we become law to ourselves. We can do whatever we like to do. And such a word as I say, anarchic word, a word that is full of disorderliness, full of evil, where everything, all manner of evil thrives, and people are permitted to do whatever they want to do. Such a word is not an interesting word to be. Word whereby somebody can just do evil, whatever comes to his mind without a check. Such a word is a dangerous word to live in. So an atheist, G.K. Chesterton, once observed, he said, when men cease to believe in God, they do not believe in nothing, they believe in anything. So if a man ceases to believe or fails to believe in the existence of God, he doesn't actually believe in nothing. He believes anything goes. So that is some of the dangers, behind this worldview, infidelity. Now, having said that, we are going to dwell more on this next word we are going to be discussing. That is deism. Deism is closer to what we see around us today. And so we want to make mention of that. We are going to dwell a little bit on that and also point out some of the pitfalls and errors contained in this presupposition and in this worldview. So what is deism? The word deism is actually the Latin word deus, which means God, and is closely allied to the Greek word theos. It's also talking about God. This system acknowledges that there is a God. It doesn't actually reject the existence of God, that he is personal, infinite, holy, and the creator of all things. That sounds good to us at the surface, but deism denies that it sustains the universe. To a deist, says God actually exists, is responsible for the creation of the world, is powerful, is personal, is infinite, is holy, but yet after the creation of the world, he stayed in heaven and allowed the world to run itself, the earth to run itself, the universe to run itself by natural laws. So that's deism. So the deist says that God just put things into motion. He is the creator, but not the sustainer. That's a deist. So for that reason, God stands aloof. He's an absentee God. It's not actually in the picture. Whatever is happening on earth doesn't concern him. It's not mindful of whatever is happening to man, whatever man is going through. He doesn't have any interest in our lives. Deism rejects the scriptures, rejects anything supernatural, because God stands alone, has nothing to do with the universe and with man. So miracle is not even in view. The providence of God is not in view in deism. The idea that God is providentially working in the world is rejected by the deist. So deism rejects the scriptures, anything supernatural, and the idea that God is providentially working in the world. By way of summary, however, it may be said that the deist begrudgingly acknowledges that God exists and even grants that God created the universe and its inhabitants. But deism insists that since his initial miraculous acts of creation, God has had nothing whatsoever to do either with the universe or mankind. Now, in this case, we have seen an error already, a shortcoming in the deist worldview. In their worldview, they said they believe that though God created the universe and the creation of the world is a miraculous act, yet they reject miracle and the supernatural. So the question is, if God could do one miracle of creation, creating the universe miraculously, how come he cannot do lesser miracles that are lesser than even the creation of the universe? So we are seeing error. So let's see more into deism, as we go on. Deism. The basic idea behind deism often is discussed and clarified via the analogy of a clock. The idea being that God created the clock, wound it up, and then walked away to leave it operating on its own. That's the idea of deism. So the God of deism, therefore, is called a hermit God, an absentee landlord. It's actually the landlord, but it's absent. It's not here. It has nothing to do with the universe. And a God in absentia. That's deism. This position is not that God cannot perform miracles. Rather, it is that God will not perform miracles because, according to deism, it is contrary to God's nature to do miracles. In deism, God and the supernatural are considered to be incompatible. So the deist believes that God can actually perform miracles. He actually did one in creation, but he won't actually do another miracle because he has nothing to do with the universe or the world. He has created the world, allowed it to run itself by natural laws, and he stood aloof. He is absent here. He has nothing to do with humanity. And for that reason, the deist or deism says that the thought of supernatural is incompatible with the nature of God. That's the God of deism. So we are seeing already errors or pitfalls in these worldviews. Let's see more clearly. Such a position inevitably leads to the following. The position of deism actually leads to the following. First, deism rejects both the triune nature of the Godhead and the deity of Christ. Since God has nothing to do with the universe and with humanity, therefore the thought of Jesus Christ, incorporated into the Godhead and incarnating, coming in the flesh, coming to dwell among us and doing the work of salvation is unthoughtful. It's not acceptable in deism. It rejects the triune nature of God, because it's through the triune nature of God that makes Jesus Christ incarnate, that made him to come, to the world to die for humanity. So that made God come into, the midst of men, and he died for us. So, but deism said, no, God has nothing to do with humanity. So he has nothing to do with the universe. He stayed in heaven. He has given man the charge of the heart. So the universe is running itself by natural laws. So the law of gravity takes care of, certain laws, the law of force, the law of aerodynamics and things like that. These are the laws that govern, the universe. So they take God out of the picture. But according to Geisler, Norman Geisler in his book and Brooks, assess the matter by suggesting that deists believe that God never specially intervenes in the world to help mankind. And the idea of the incarnation of Jesus Christ was God's intervention to help mankind. The idea of redemption was God's intervention, God intervening to help mankind. But the deist rejects the intervention of God in the world to help mankind. Since this also means that Jesus was not God. And that would be a miracle if Jesus, if you claim that Jesus is God. So they also believe that there is no reason for them to believe that God is a Trinity. The idea of three persons in one nature, the Trinity, is to them just bad mathematics. So they can't just comprehend that that's a bad maths for the deists.
Yeah.
So they can't comprehend that.
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
let's see some of their basic tenets. Basic tenets of deism goes as follows. Number one, according to Hoover, Hoover noted that deists believed in the supreme being. Like we have established, they do not actually reject or deny the existence of the supreme being, but it was only one in number. They denied the doctrine of Trinity and incarnation. Jesus Christ was merely a great moral teacher, according to the deists. Thus, the deist denies any supernatural redemptive act in history. So in deism, the redemptive act of God, God's intervention in human affair, is out of place. So they reject that altogether. Again, also basic to the tenets of deism is the rejection of the idea that God has given a special revelation of himself in the Bible. Why would God even do that in the first place? Since he had nothing to do with the universe, he has created the universe and he allowed it to run itself. So there was no reason for him to reveal himself. That's according to the deist. So deism said, no, there is no reason for God revealing himself through the Bible. So they reject altogether the idea that God had given special revelation of himself in the Bible. For God to reveal himself by speaking directly to man would be a miracle. So, and remember where we started from, deism said, God, you are up there, I am down here. So you are doing whatever you want to do in heaven, and I'm in control and in charge here on earth. So for God to have condescended, to have come to man, to reveal himself to man, in what we call the special revelation of God in the scripture, could have been an act of miracle, and deism rejects that altogether. So, for deism, there is no miracle. For deism, the special revelation of God, of himself in the Bible, is, it's a no-no, was rejected altogether. This is something the deist is not prepared to accept. Observation of the general revelation that God has left of himself in nature, says the deist, is sufficient for understanding the Creator and his desire for mankind. They said there's no reason for God's special revelation since God has revealed himself in nature, through nature. So, and they said that is sufficient enough. But how sufficient is God's general revelation? Truly, we said the very first book that God wrote to humanity, to mankind, was nature. So, nature reveals the existence of God. Nature tells us about the wisdom of God, tells us about the power of God, tells us about the creative ability and potential of God. However, as good as this revelation of God and as clearly as nature has revealed God, the revelation of God through nature does not bring man into an intimate relationship with God. The revelation of God through nature does not actually result in redemption or salvation, because the general revelation of God through nature does not only gives man a clue to the existence of God, but does not bring man into a cordial and intimate relationship with God, does not lead to salvation, does not lead to redemption of man. So the general revelation of God is not enough. So God undertook to reveal himself specially through the Bible and ultimately through his son Jesus Christ, as we have in Hebrews chapter 1 from verse 1 to 3. God in sundry time had revealed himself to our fathers through the prophets, and in through diverse ways, nature, through revelations, through tales, through parables, and several other means. But in the last days, he has revealed himself to us through his son, the radiance of his glory, the exact representation of his person. Therefore, Jesus is God's exegesis. When we see Jesus, we see God. Jesus is the finality of God's revelation to mankind. But deism rejects this altogether. So we are seeing some of the pitfalls in that worldview. Again, in the basic tenets of deism, Number 3, deism advocates that human reason alone is all man needs to understand God and his law for mankind. So deism says all that man needs to understand God is just human reason. That's all that man needs. But, if God is supernatural, if God is a spirit, and we can't relate with him, so sometimes, because God is a spirit, because God is supernatural, we have to go deeper than the level of cognitive knowledge of God. For us to encounter God supernaturally, we have to go deeper than the cognitive knowledge of God. So we have to accept the truth about God by faith. So reason is insufficient to actually reveal the totality of the supernatural and the eternal God to man. Reason is not against faith, and faith is not against reason, but faith is above reason altogether. So but the deist said that all that man needs to interact with God, to encounter God, is reason and reason alone. But we said because God is supernatural, God is eternal, God is a spirit, therefore we need to encounter God in a level that is deeper than the cognitive one. So we are seeing some of the basic tenets of deism. Again, number 4, in deism rejects the notions of a prayer hearing, prayer answering God, and a God who works in men's lives through divine providence. Because remember the basic word is intervention. So God doesn't have to intervene. The world runs itself. So by natural and things like that. So deism reject the notion of God hearing prayers, God answering prayers. You understand? So they reject that altogether. Okay. So what should be our response to deism? What response may be offered to deism? How should we respond to this? I haven't considered their tenets. So how should we respond to deism? Number 1, deism's flawed view of God's inability to work miracles must be addressed. We must address their flawed views, of God's inability to work miracles. Because if deism believes in the creation of the universe by the hand of God as a supernatural or miraculous act, and if God could do that, therefore God can actually, we can give him the preference and the trust that he can do even lesser miracles than the creation of the world. So you have to address the deism's flawed view of God's inability to work miracles. According to Odwan, he reasoned as follows. He said, now we can see that deism is actually irrational. If God can perform the miracle of creation, there is no good reason why he cannot do other miracles. There is no reason. So thus, deism has an inconsistency in its core or at its core. So 2 affirmations at the very heart of deism. Number 1, God performed the miracle of creation. Deism believes that. And number 2, God does not perform miracles. So we can see the inconsistency in this at the core of deism itself. So if you are a deist, you must believe both of them. And yet these affirmations cannot both be true. By the law of non-contradiction, something cannot be true and false at the same time. So but this says that God performed the miracle of creation, and yet they say God doesn't perform miracles. So that's a contradiction in their view. Therefore, deism is not a believable worldview. It's founders on the criterion of consistency. So that's one of the ways we can respond to deism. Again, let's see other responses we can offer to deism. In speaking to this same point, Geisler added, since God performed the miracle of creation ex nihilo means from nothing, it follows that the very nature and power of this kind of God, that other lesser miracles are possible. So that's what guys like saying. He said it follows if God could perform the miracle of creation, from nothing, it follows from the very nature and power of this kind of God that other lesser miracles are possible. Walking on water is little problem for a God who created water to begin with. So to make a human through a female ovum of virgin birth is not difficult for a God who made a whole world from nothing. The multiplying loaves is surely not a greater feat than creating matter in the first place. In short, it is self-defeating to admit the miracle of creation and deny that other miracles are possible. So we are saying that's one of the ways we can respond to, to deism, to their worldview. Again, let's see some other responses. What responses we can offer again? We said, if the deist believes supernatural creation occurred, he cannot deny the only divine source of knowledge concerning that creation, special revelation. He can't. Then again, since God created the laws of the universe, and since those laws are contingent upon God for their existence, because he created them, they are contingent upon him. Therefore, there is no good reason why any omnipotent God could not set aside those laws for the benefit of mankind. Since every law that he created are contingent upon him, he created the law. So the omnipotent God, the all-powerful God, can at some point out of his prerogative alter or put aside some of these natural laws, for the benefit of mankind. And we've seen God actually overriding some laws by introducing a higher law in getting things done. Even in the natural world, we see higher laws or lesser law bowing to higher laws. The law of gravity says whatever goes up comes down. But the law of force says the time spent when the object is thrown up and the time it comes down, the time that it spends in suspension, what makes it suspended is the law of force. So, and again, we see another law, the law of aerodynamics. How can a big metal as a plane fly without crashing and dropping every minute, and it flies for hours? So that is the law of aerodynamics that is bigger and stronger than the law of gravity and the law of force altogether. So we have one law overriding the other. So if natural law is even governed and structured that way, how much more the omnipotent God, that he cannot put aside some laws for the benefit of mankind. Furthermore, would not a God concerned enough to create humans likewise be concerned enough to intervene on their behalf on occasion? Now, and I like to say that again so that it can be clear. Furthermore, would not a God concerned enough to create humankind likewise be concerned enough to intervene on their behalf on occasion, especially if they are fallen into grave, that's spiritual danger? If God could care enough to even create man in the first place, so why would not care for the man if the man is falling into danger, into grave danger? Such a God will still go after such a man. I like the way 1 Peter puts it, chapter 5, verse 7, it said, casting your cares upon him, for he cares for you. The version of the Bible puts it this way, say, put the loads of your anxiety on him, for you are his personal concern. So God is still very concerned about his creation. It's not the absentee God. It's not the old papa that wind the work clock and it puts it and to run itself, to keep working on itself, and it stands aloof in heaven. God is immanent in human history. He's interested. It's not just transcendent, it's also immanent. So we're going to get to understand that later. Okay, number 4, how to respond to deism. The idea that human reason alone is an adequate guide for mankind and that the natural world can provide him with all that he needs to know in regard to behavior, ethics, response to God, etc., is severally flawed. When man exalts reason alone as a final standard and limits his knowledge of God to whatever he can discern from the natural world around him, is destined to fail. So man cannot rely on his reason as the ultimate standard for behavior. He must actually accept the existence of God and accept to live for him. So that is how we can respond to deism. Okay, now before I go to the next, let me pause a bit and ask if you have any question, anything for me to clarify before we perhaps go for break.
All right, so thank you. That's very interesting anyway. So this worldview, this individual, the individual, the group like Christianity body, they are a body as well. Like deism now, is it like deism now? Is it an organization? Is it a body or
No,
individuals?
it's just a belief found in some individuals.
Okay.
Some individuals are they have accepted these views. They just believe there is no God, or God actually exists and is staying somewhere. So it's a personal view that people hold about God.
Okay.
It's a personal view. So these are contrary to Christians' worldview. So we don't expect to see any of this among Christians. The ones we dealt with last week were presuppositions that can be found among Christians. These ones are philosophical views and worldviews, that are contrary to Christian worldviews.
So, but they don't exist in a body like an organization.
Now, there are association of atheists.
Okay.
Atheists can form association. Agnostics can also have association. They can have something they do in common, and they say, okay, all of us, we are atheists, we are agnostics, we are deists, and things like that. So let us come together and to promote our belief and whatever. So we have them in institutions and places here and there.
Okay, that's fine.
Yeah, but they are not religious bodies.
Yeah.
Okay, so I want us to go for a break. We return in 25 minutes. That's by 3:30 my own time. That should be 2:30 your own time. So
we have same time now.
You said?
It's same time now.
Okay, the same time now.
Yeah. Since Sunday, the time has been I've been adjusted.
Can you imagine? Okay. Thank you. So
all right.
We come back. This is such an interesting worldview, that we want to deal with. Pantheism, what about it? Both theist and deist worldview hold to the view which suggests that God is out there. So deists believe that there is God, that God exists. That's according to the theist, and the deists also believe that God exists, but God actually is up there, is above, is powerful, sovereign, and things like that. But yet, he has nothing to do with the universe since he had created the universe. So, in other words, the two first worldview, the theist worldview and the deist worldview believe that God is transcendent, is beyond the world. That's what transcendency. However, pantheism, thinks differently from these two worldviews. The word pantheism, let's divide the word into two. We have pan and we have theism. The word pan means all, and theism, or the word theos, means God. So in other words, it means pantheism teaches that God is here. It's not in the least transcendent, but merely immanent. So in the case of pantheism, God is not transcendent, it's immanent. Now let's bring it more, let's say it more bluntly. Pantheism simply means that God is everything and everything is God. That's pantheism. God is all and all is God. So that's what pantheism is. God and the whole world and the world are so closely intertwined that they cannot tell them apart. So in pantheism, we can actually differentiate, we can't separate the word from God, because God is the word and the word is God itself. So we can't actually separate them. So the central tenet of pantheism is that God is all and all is God. So how faulty is this worldview is what we're going to be examining, but let us push it further. The 17th century philosopher Baruch Spinoza, was one of the spokespersons advocating this concept. Now, by the way, pantheism is found among the Hindus in India. It's so popular among them. So they believe that God is everything, God is all and all is God. So in commenting on Spinoza's influence in this regard, Kong wrote, Spinoza's God does not live apart from the universe. God is in the world and the world is in God. That is pantheism. So, in other words, it teaches, the immanence of God, but pantheism should not be confused with God's omnipresence, that God is present everywhere. That's not the same. That's not the same thing we are trying to project here. Omnipresence means God is everywhere, but not in everything. But pantheism says God is in everything and everything is in God. So God is all and all is God. So that's pantheism. But Christians' view of God says God is omnipresent. In other words, God is actually everywhere. So God being everywhere doesn't mean that God is in everything. So, but pantheism said God is all and all is God. Nature is a particular way in which God himself exists. That's what pantheism teaches. Human consciousness is a particular way in which God himself thinks. So in other words, pantheism says God thinks through human consciousness. The individual self and all finite things are not autonomous substances, but only modifications of the one and only divine substance. So man is not actually separate from God, and God is not separate from man. That's the teaching of pantheism, and we say that is an erroneous worldview. God then, according to pantheism, all in all is a purely immanent, not a transcendent God. Now, you must understand where this falls. Now, when we consider some other worldviews, especially after this talk, we are going to be talking about the concept of God in Islam, African religion, and Christian religion. And one of the things we see in African traditional or in Islamic religion, or their concept about God, is that Islamic concept of God is that of transcendency, the lofty one, greater than all, is the greatest. Allahu Akbar, the God is the greatest. There is none as great as he, right?
It's absolute.
It falls short of the Christian's view of God that teaches both transcendency and the immanence of God.
Immanence,
So in Christianity, God is above all, yet God relates with his creation in an intimate level. That's why Jesus Christ will teach us how to pray, our Father who art in heaven. He's teaching us something about the immanence of God, which is not clearly stated, or even it's not even an explicit or explicit teaching in Islam. Islam rejects that together, that God cannot consider to the point of relating at the intimate level with man. So in Islam, God reveals himself to be feared. But in Christianity, God revealed himself for the sake of fellowship and relationship. But we see in pantheism, like we are discussing, that pantheism only teaches or pitches its tent on the immanence of God and not on his transcendency. So God is all and all is God. That's pantheism. But let's see, in this worldview, Winfried addresses this topic when he observed. He said, in this worldview, God and the world are identical, not just in the sense of identical twins who merely resemble each other strongly, but in the sense of one being and the same thing. The words word and God are then used as two different expressions of one thing. So that's a faulty worldview. That's a faulty one which should not be embraced or accepted, because we see the scriptural, worldview or the biblical worldview about God tells us that God is separate and distinct from everything he has created. So we are going to be seeing some of the implications of this worldview. The implication of pantheism, of the pantheistic worldview is as follows. If pantheism is correct, then there is no longer a need for we humans to look beyond ourselves for solution to whatever problem that may be plaguing us or that has plagued us, since there is no separation, there's no distinction between me and God. As a matter of fact, some people come to the conclusion that I am God. That's some people's conclusion. They said, we are God. So because in pantheism, God is all and all is God. So God was not distinct or separate from his creation. So therefore, they come to the conclusion that human beings, if they can actually work so much and tap into their tap potentials and the reservoir of their human potential, they can actually one day grow to become a God themselves. So, but we said if pantheism as a worldview is actually correct, then there is no need for any one of us, any human beings, to look beyond themselves, for solution to whatever problems that may be plaguing us. Instead, we simply look within. So that is some of the implications of this worldview. Again, we being God are our own source